Hello, fellow gypsies and spiritual wanderers. This is Mocha Gypsy. I'm just out here by the river grounding, and I had a few thoughts on some things, particularly cursing unintentionally or doing magic unintentionally, just with the power of your mind and your will and your emotions, because I've experienced that several times. And it's actually one of the reasons why I got into magic, because after a few incidences that were concerning to me, I decided that, maybe that's, something that I may need to look into controlling and cultivating. But anyhow, I have a teacher. His name is Lucky Links. I've taken a few classes through him for reading certain oracle cards and learning to do crystal gazing and such. And he's a Tibetan Bon Buddhist. It's the same type of Buddhism that Star Wars was based off of. George Lucas, he basically took the elements of that religion and he incorporated, the Force and all that stuff. But anyhow, Lucky Links, he has a YouTube channel on here. You should check it out. He told me that you have to be mindful of your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions and such, because every thought is either an intention, a blessing, or a curse. And I found that to be true. And then on top of that, what can happen, he told me what can also happen, is that if you're dwelling on something, thinking on something, have a very, very strong desire, and he uses the example, say that someone's in a church, like a Catholic church, praying to themselves or something for something. A random spirit or entity might hear you or feel you and grant you your wish. Maybe they'll want something in return, maybe not, or something. But what he said, that made sense to me also. Anyhow, I had a dream last night that I was back in Sundance, Wyoming. That's where I lived for 6 years before moving to Costa Rica, roughly almost 3 years ago. And it was sort of like a nightmare. There was a parade. They were having a parade outside. I was still living in the small domestic violence shelter house that I was renting in the center of town. And I left Eloise back here in Costa Rica. I had no idea why I was back in Sundance, or Wyoming. And then people started talking, "Oh, she's back, she's back." And, word caught like fire around town that I was back in town, and I got arrested. So, and I had it in the back of my mind, I'm going to get out of this somehow. And I woke up. I was like, man, why did I have that dream? That's, whew. Man, you do not want to live there if you didn't grow up around there. Even if you're a white person. They don't even like white people. Anyone on the outside, if you did not come in if your family lineage does not come in from the 1800s on the chuck wagon, the little house on the prairie days, you're considered an outsider. And that's actually the word they use, outsiders. Other states, other places will say, oh, this person's a California transplant. A new person from Colorado or something. They actually will say outsiders, just to give you an idea. But anyway, I probably had that dream because recently a friend of mine called to my attention that the town population is now 0.0 black people there. I was the only one there. And she was telling me like how when I lived there before, the population number for black people were 0.001. So I guess I was that 0.001. How crazy is that? And another thing that I noticed, because she sent me the link to the website with the numbers, I noticed that since I left, since the 2.5 years that I left, that their population numbers overall was cut basically in half. It used to be roughly 2,000 people, and now it's like around 900 or something crazy like that. And that's sort of a big deal because Sundance, even though it's a small town like 30 miles from the South Dakota border, it's still a town seat for that whole entire county. All right, that's supposed to be like a main hub still, like where a courthouse is there. There's like 2 police departments, one for state and one for, you know, local county. Anyway, so I just figured, you know, that place is just so corrupt, and it just so corrupt, creepy, close-minded, sociopathic. The whole place is like run by psychopaths. I'm not even kidding. And treated me so poorly, so badly. I'm wondering now if I cursed that town without even thinking. There's still people who I care about there. I still have a couple of friends there and people who I care about, but that's kind of a strange thing to happen. Maybe it's because of what, you know, with COVID, maybe the economy, I don't know, but there's been rough times before, and that's still kind of weird for a town like that to have their population cut in half. But anyhow, but I like to think that I did. I kind of like to think that I did. But back to the subject of cursing unintentionally. You know, like I was married twice. My first husband was this Italian guy, this older Italian guy, older than me. And, you know, for the most part, he treated me well, but he would do messed up things on purpose. He had issues. And he did one particular thing that I didn't like. I can't even remember what it is now because it was many years ago. And I just kept on dwelling on it. And he's a mason, so that's loosely that's construction and stuff. And I remember being at work just thinking of something crazy he did or said to me. And I was just pissed. And I was like 25 at the time. And then I just decided to call him from work. And he picked up the phone, and the first thing he said is like, "Honey, I can't talk right now. I just injured my arm. I was sanding something, and the side of my hand brushed up against, got sliced by a shard of metal, and it started bleeding, and I tried to stop it, and it kept on bleeding, and it was pumping with my heartbeat. So now I'm on my way to the hospital. I'll talk to you later." And I just, you know, just instinctively, and remember, I wasn't back then, I wasn't into magic. All I did was like tarot cards for myself, and I would have crystals and stuff. It didn't even occur to me that maybe it was a coincidence. I just felt instinctively that it had something to do with the thoughts I had previously. All right. And then, you know, I had my godmother. Now we're jumping to like 13 years ago. My godmother, it happens to be, you know, an older white woman. She was my godmother, and she was also my best friend. But before that, she was my boss when I worked at Hartford College of Women. But we grew close together and everything like that. She's done a lot in my life and everything, as far as guiding me in ways that my real mother wouldn't. She was like a mother to me in a lot of ways. But that friendship unfortunately ended because she started to be, certain things just started to not be right about her. And she started to be like more and more controlling, to the point where I thought I couldn't be my own person. You know, she would like do things like criticize my personality and things like that. But anyway, towards the end of the friendship, you know, she was feeling depressed about her husband passing away, because she was someone in her 60s at the time. And we lived far apart. That's when I lived in Litchfield, when I saw my first spirit. And she lived in the Hartford area. And, you know, I was noticing for a full week that she was getting more and more depressed. And her husband had been dead for about 2 years now, okay? But she was starting to get like a more depressed view of life. You know, I guess that's kind of understandable and such. So I just decided to, okay, I'm gonna drive an hour and a half. I'm gonna come get you. We're gonna go out. We're gonna have fun. So I went out on my way, drove roughly an hour and a half to go get her. And she loves Litchfield. She loved Litchfield Hills. And I drove an hour and a half to bring her back up, you know, and so we had lunch there, you know, and drove around and had all this fun and stuff. And then I drove her back to Hartford, and we went to Wadsworth Atheneum. That's a museum in Hartford, the oldest in the country. And they were playing a movie, Gone with the Wind, and she likes that stuff, right? But unbeknownst to me, well, I had, like days ago, I had McDonald's, right? And I put it in the back seat I ate it in the car, and I put it in the back seat of my car, and I kind of forgot about it. And she started complaining about the smell that was coming from my car. And I was like, oh shoot. I looked and I saw that I had my old McDonald's. I don't eat McDonald's anymore, by the way. But, so without hesitation, and we were in downtown Hartford on Main Street, I still remember this like this was yesterday. I pulled up quick to the curb, and I took that bag and I chucked it. I chucked it at a public garbage receptacle, and I got back in the car. I was like, oh, I'm sorry about that. I kind of forgot that I left that in the back. Sorry. But she kept on complaining about the smell in my car, and I made sure all the windows were rolled down. I turned on the AC and stuff, and she was still complaining about it. Oh, it still stinks in here. It's still blah 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 blah. And I was like, I started thinking in the back of my mind, like, which I went through all this trouble to take you out, drove up from the mountains, drove you back up the mountains, drove you down from the mountains to have a good time, and you're dwelling on this. I went out of my way to make you feel better, and you seem to be going out of your way to make me feel bad. So when the evening was over, I dropped her home, and for a whole week, I didn't even call her. I was so angry. And I have mother issues to begin with, because I grew up with a cold, unapproving mother. So that really hit a vein with me. So I was dwelling on it, angry, just freaking you couldn't even believe it. And then, like on the 6th night, I get a random phone call from her, and she's like, "Hey, Drea." I'm like, "What?" Could you take me could you pick me up from the hospital? What do you mean? I started bleeding from my nose, and it wouldn't stop. And I went to the emergency room, and the doctors couldn't stop the bleeding, so they had to cauterize it. basically burned the inside of her nose. And I was like, I did that. I just knew I did that. So I picked her up, drove her home. She wasn't complaining about the smell of my car then. But yeah, so took her home. She was okay. I guess her nose healed up after they burnt the inside of it. Still they couldn't explain to her why it happened, how it happened, why it couldn't stop. But they got it out under control, thankfully. So yeah, that sort of stuff can happen. But it can also happen in a good way, you know, like there was a time in another life I used to sell real estate for my dad, who was a broker, and he's also a distant figure. And the first year after I got my license, I worked for him. He didn't invest any time and energy in me in training or anything like that, so I wasn't getting any sales. And one day, and it was almost for a full year, I didn't have any sales. Okay, I had my regular day job working for my godmother, who was my boss at the time, but he was like, you know, not helping me. So anyhow, one day I remember driving and I just got so frustrated with myself. All these people were getting sales around me and I wasn't getting anything. And I just remember just yelling in my car going down the highway saying, why am I not getting any sales? Why? I want, you know, I paid X amount of dollars. I spent X amount of time getting my license. Why the F am I not getting anywhere? I want things that I do to pay off. And, you know, that feeling left me, and I just went about my business throughout the day. The very next day, I got my first client with my first commission. So it happens in good ways too, you know. You know, and I think back to that moment where you just have strong emotions behind your thoughts. Either the universe shifts for you, or maybe like what my teacher explained, maybe, you know, there was some sort of spirit or entity that heard you and said, okay, let's make this happen. But ever since then, back to the real estate thing, I started making I left my dad's company. He still does not talk to me because of that. And I went to a big company, William Ravis. That's a big, well, as far as I know, still a big company in New England. And I started making sales, and I was really on my way to being a top agent. So anyhow, so I'm just wondering. So now I'm just wondering about Sundance, Wyoming, if I had a hand in that or not. Or, you know, or it could be natural consequences. You know, natural consequences, not necessarily a curse, because that place is so corrupt. Hatred of women, hatred of minorities, and they don't even try to hide it. You know, all these things that happened to me, and by my ex-husband, were basically allowed by the people in the system there. You know, women and men alike. You know, no one cared about protecting my child. Protecting me, definitely not. So, you know, a place that corrupt and creepy and just overall mean, you know, I guess it just doesn't make for a thriving community. You know, so it could be natural consequences, but I still like to think a little bit that I had something to do with it. Or maybe it's both, you know, maybe it's both. But anyhow, I'm saying all this to say that, yeah, be very mindful. Be very mindful of your feelings, your thoughts and intentions, because it does have an impression, even if you may not even see it. But sometimes when it's strong, well, a lot of times when it's strong, you do see you can see things shift immediately. So just be very mindful. Anyway, what do you guys think? What do you guys think? Is this just manifestation on the universe? Do you think it's like my teacher explained, that some sort of entity may have heard you and did some work on your behalf? Or are things just natural consequences? You know, let me know in the comments. I'm very curious to know. Anyway, this is Mocha Gypsy signing off. Peace out.